Hello and God bless you, students of the Rivers of Life International School of Ministry. We are continuing on in our teaching series, and we are now in the second portion with the miracle ministry of Jesus. Today we're going to focus in on one of the miracles that Jesus worked. This is our fifth or sixth chapter in this series, the woman with the issue of blood. Our lesson text is found in St. Luke, the 8th chapter, verses 43 through 48. Now I'm going to read that now. And it says, a woman having an issue of blood 12 years, which had spent all her living upon physicians, neither could be healed of any, came behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her issue of blood was stanched. And Jesus said, who touched me? When all denied, Peter and they that were with him said, Master, the multitude throng thee and press upon thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? And Jesus said, somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is gone out of me. And when the woman saw that she was not hid, she came trembling, falling down before him, and declared unto him before all the people for what cause she had touched him, and how she was immediately healed. And he said unto her, Daughter, be of good comfort, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace. So notice this was a situation where not where Jesus had touched or laid hands, but that someone by faith had pressed and made an effort to get to him, even though this woman was sick, even though this woman had been hemorrhaging blood and had been hemorrhaging for a number of years. And as a result, her faith caused her to move to where Jesus was, not for him to touch her, but for her to touch him. Again, our memory verse, of course, was the one that we just read, verse 46. And Jesus said, somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is gone out of me. So it was a different type of touch. It was not a typical touch where I touch you or we rub up against one another, brush one another, but it was a touch of faith. And Jesus felt, because of the touch of faith, the virtue leave his body and heal this woman. Let's go to our introduction here as we go forth into this lesson. We have read the many miracles of Jesus. He often laid hands upon the sick or spoke to the person. In this lesson, we see where a woman was healed as a result of touching him. Jesus was not aware that the woman was there, but he was aware that somebody had touched him. Now, I say this from a humanistic standpoint. Jesus, of course, being God, was aware of everything. But from the humanistic standpoint, Jesus was not aware, meaning that he was the man was not aware. The man was walking through the crowd, the thronging of the crowd, the people pushing to get to him, and he did not specifically recognize her or look or single her out or call her out. But I like to believe in my mind that Jesus knew what was about to happen. But the Bible says this, that when she touched him, it was not an ordinary touch. As we read further, it was not an ordinary touch. The disciples did not understand and were apparently apologetic when he asked, who touched me? Now, again, picture this situation. Jesus is walking, people are pushing, people are shoving, people are, the Bible said, thronging him, which is basically what that means. The disciples, I can imagine, are acting like bodyguards trying to shield him and keep the people from getting to him. I was looking at something interestingly enough the other day where a particular dignitary was surrounded by bodyguards, about 8 in all, trying to get him from one point to another without the threat of someone coming up close to him. And so the bodyguards surrounded him, 8 in total in this case of what I'm talking about. And of course here, Jesus had 12 and they were surrounding him. And yet this woman got through the crowd, got through the thronging, got through the press, what the Bible calls, she got into the press, and was able just to touch the border of Jesus' garment. And this is what motivated the faith. Remember, it's not just a touch, but it was the motivation or the faith that caused her to get to where Jesus was, regardless of the circumstances. Let's read on. Peter reminded Jesus of the thronging crowd, knowing that someone was bound to touch him no matter how much they tried to shield him. But Jesus did not feel the touch of the crowd, but it was a touch of faith that stopped him because he felt virtue leave his body. Now again, this was not, as I stated, an ordinary touch. There was a motive behind the touch. There was something behind the woman that made her come out of her comfort And understand, a person that has been hemorrhaging that long was in great discomfort, great pain. I'm not a doctor, but I've had situations where I've lost blood flow, and usually what happens is your extremities will get numb. You can't feel your extremities. It becomes difficult to walk. Here was a woman who had an issue or a hemorrhage in her body that had been lasting a number of years. And a lot of things happen when you losing blood that long, because again, in the blood is the life flow, and the blood is the nutritions. When the blood stops flowing, the oxygen stops moving. Blood carries oxygen throughout the body. And that's why sometimes if you sleep on your arm or sleep on your hand, when you wake up, your arm is numb or your hand is numb or something like that, because what happens is that you're stopping the blood circulation. And so if you notice, your arm or your hand or even fingers become numb because the source of oxygen and nutrition is no longer flowing freely. Here's a woman that had been suffering this for a number of years. And as a result of suffering this, there were a number of things that were consistent in her body. Now, I'm sure that there were trouble in her feet, in her knees, pain in her lower extremities, which would have made it difficult for her to walk. Generally, if people are suffering that type of ailment where their blood is not flowing freely throughout the body, they can suffer dizzy spells because, once again, the oxygen is not flowing freely to the brain. The senses become dull. You experience dizzy spells from prolonged standing. If you stand too long in that condition, you can black out. All of these situations that follow this woman: pain in the joints, pain in the lower extremities, no doubt pain in the back. And I kind of look at this and believe that evidently this woman was to the point where she was about to pass out, because remember now, she touched the border of his garment, the hem of his garment on the ground. Had she had full senses, she might have been standing up. And I don't think she was necessarily knocked to the ground. Then again, that's quite possible, because again, she would have been very weak. Once again, the loss of blood flow, the inconsistency of blood flow, the lack of oxygen, the lack of nutrition would have made her very weak. So if she had not passed out, she very easily could have been knocked to the ground. Had she been standing, she would have touched Jesus on his back or grabbed his hand, but she was on the ground of a large crowd of pressing, thronging people. A lot of things could have gone on while this happened before she got to Jesus. She could have been stepped on. She could have been accidentally kicked. A number of things. But you know, one of the things that Jesus felt in this woman was her faith that caused her to move into action. She said, the scripture says, if I can just touch the hem of his garment. And so she became focused, regardless of the setbacks, regardless of what she suffered, even previous to this time, all of the things that would go on in her physical body, the possibility of blacking out, the possibility of getting weak, the possibility of pain, and all those things that went along with this affliction that she had been suffering for a number of years. The possibility of getting in a crowd and being knocked down, being kicked, being stepped upon. All these I'm sure she considered, but she became focused on one thing. If I can just get to Jesus, and not necessarily wait for me to pray him to lay hands on me, but I'm going to touch him. This is what Jesus felt, because this is what her faith caused her to do. You know what the scripture says? Faith without works. I believe that's in the book of James. James says faith without works is dead. Or word of works, faith without action. It's one thing to say what to do. It's another thing to take what you say and put it into action. So faith without action, faith without works is dead. There is a possibility that this woman, even in the midst of this, could have died. Because again, she blacked out, or could have blacked out. And again, being in that situation, could have been kicked in the head, which would cause a concussion, brain damage. And that state could have made her comatose and even died. Taking all these things into consideration, the woman still said, I must get to Jesus. All right, let's go to our discussion. We're often praying for the Lord to touch us, our bodies, our minds, our circumstances. God is touched, however, by faith in him. Now again, notice this, we reverse it. We want the Lord to touch us, but what touches God? What touches our Lord? He is touched by our faith in him. The scripture says this: without faith, it is impossible to please God. For he that cometh to God, this is Hebrews 11:6, he that cometh to God must first believe that he is. He is what? He is a healer. He is a deliverer. He's a waymaker. He's a help. He is God. He that cometh to him must first believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. And what does diligence mean? Diligence means consistent. Diligence means persistence in spite of opposition. Oftentimes we face oppositions. And I will say this to you students, even as you're going through these classes, depending on your aptitude, some of you may have difficulty with this, and people would give up. And sometimes even in ministry, people give up. And sometimes even people walking with God give up. Why? Because of the confrontations that they face. But again, let's examine this woman and what she was facing. Let's look at it again. She was facing sickness. She was facing the possibility of blacking out, dying. She was facing pain. She was facing discomfort. She was in a crowd of people in her condition. She was being knocked to and fro with those people in her condition, yet she continued to press. And I'm sure the woman, in order to get to Jesus, had to do some pushing herself. She was weak, but she had to do some pushing herself. She had to do some crawling, but her mind was made up, I've got to get to Jesus. And once again, this is what touched Jesus. It was not just the physical touch. It was everything that went into that touch, the faith. He that cometh to God must believe that he is. In this case, he is a healer, and I've got to touch him. All right, let's go a little bit further. Faith above everything else seemed to impress the Lord. Now, again, when we look at the Bible, we see that oftentimes there were things that people did, actions of faith that impressed the Lord. He was impressed by the centurion's faith in St. Luke 8:5-13. To synopsis the story, he didn't feel worthy that the Lord should come and enter into his house, but simply asked him to speak the word. And Jesus was so impressed. He was so impressed with this faith and said, I haven't found this greater faith in all of Israel. The man realized he didn't feel worthy for Jesus to even come into his house. And yet his desire was not for himself, but one of his servants. And he evidently had seen enough of Jesus, quite possibly from afar off, being that he was a soldier, had probably been in the crowds, observed Jesus healing the sick, observed Jesus casting out devils. And you remember a couple of lessons ago when we talked about the devil's testimony. He evidently heard the devil testifying that we know that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, come to torture and torment us before the time. And evidently this centurion was impressed. He had not been a member of the synagogue. He was not a Jew. He had not been taught in Hebrew school or anything like that. But he saw Jesus and saw what Jesus did. And it did something to him that it didn't do to all of Israel. It instilled faith in him that everybody did not have. And so Jesus said, I have not found so great a faith in all of Israel. He was impressed by the man's faith and simply sent the word. He was impressed with the Syrophoenician woman's faith, St. Mark 7:25-30, who was ignored and then insulted. Now let's look at this scenario here. Here was a woman who was a Greek. She was not, again, a Jew. She was not considered of the household of faith. And the Bible said that she came to Jesus and began to cry and address him, Lord, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus ignored her. Now, why would Jesus ignore her? Once again, Jesus, knowing all things, knew this woman, knew her motive. And I honestly believe that Jesus used this situation as an example to everyone else, because the Jews felt they were exclusive. They felt like they were privileged. We get this because we're privileged. And Jesus played right into their prejudice. Jesus ignored her. And she continued to come to him. Lord, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And he kept ignoring her. And the disciples became irritated with her. Now, students, I want you to even think about this in your life. And even when you begin to share this with others, regardless to what portion of ministry that you may go into, notice how Jesus ignored the woman. What do you say? Some of you that will be missionaries, some of you that will go to foreign countries, to people that feel like that they've been neglected. And sometimes you may even look at them and feel like they've been neglected, even though they don't necessarily feel that way. It's interesting about this, and you'll find this in your course of life, that sometimes the privileges that we are blessed to have, particularly here in America, Everybody in portions of the world does not have this privilege, not have the privileges. Easy access to food, easy access to shelter. Some people live in mud huts and got to go and hunt their food. Easy access to fire. Some of them, to go to the stove. A lot of them don't have that convenience. They have to rub sticks together and use flint rocks to make fire. I mean, a lot of things that we have, we may look at that with our mindset and feel like these people are really suffering. And the reality is they don't really feel like they're suffering themselves because, once again, they have not learned anything better. My point is this, that some of the privileges that the Jews thought they deserved, they didn't feel that this woman was worthy. And they continued to become irritated by her, even Jesus' own disciples. Jesus' disciples, we find that they had a prejudice problem themselves. You think that a lot of the racial and prejudice problems that we experience today are new and unique. They're not. Even Jesus' disciples had a problem. And they looked at this Greek woman and considered her nothing more than a dog. Now, let me say this. To be called a dog in those days was equivalent to be called the N-word amongst we as African Americans. It's an insult. It's the lowest form of insult. Matter of fact, it's even been outlawed and banned because of political correctness in this day and time. But what am I saying? The racial mind, the mindset of the Jews at that time considered anybody other than a Jew was a dog. And any time you read a dog in the Bible, it's always spoken of in an insulting term. Now, again, I don't say that to discourage you from having a dog. Some of you have dogs, you love dogs. But in biblical days, a dog was always spoken of in an insulting manner. The dog that turns again to his own vomit. When Goliath faced David, he said, "Am I a dog that you should send a boy to me to fight a man's battle?" He was insulted. The Bible said that when it spoke of the pastors that scattered the flock, it referred to them as dumb dogs. So anytime the Bible spoke of a dog, and that's just one, I think there are a couple more, but anytime when the Bible spoke of a dog, it always spoke of a dog in a negative manner. So now when Jesus says, and understand this, Jesus says to the woman, I tell you what, let's read on. Let me make sure I get in here. Okay, it's in your text there. Jesus said, "It is not meet to take children's bread." And he's playing into the prejudice of the people. And I believe he's playing into the prejudice of the people to shame them. It is not meet to take children's bread and cast it to dogs. Now that woman very easily could have been insulted, like many of us would have been insulted. But again, her faith moved beyond the insults. I've said this I believe in some of our lessons past. I say this quite often, that oftentimes when we are seeking for something, a lot of times the Lord will try how much do we want it. He'll try us by desperation. How desperate are you for what you're asking for? This woman wanted the Lord to heal her daughter. Her daughter was grievously vexed with the spirit, the Bible said. And she came to Jesus with all of the titles. Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. He ignored her. She came to him again a second time. Son of David, have mercy. He ignored her. Finally, at the end, she just said, "Lord, help me." All of the formalities were gone. All of the titles were gone. All of the things. She just desperately cried, "Lord, help me." And when she came that way, Jesus insulted her. She already dealt with enough with the people. She already dealt with enough with the disciples, send her away, pushing her away. And now she comes to the Lord, her only hope, and the Lord insults her. Now, again, this pulls desperation out of this woman. And again, I want you to see the strength and the gist and the depth of this lesson, because sometimes we can read over stuff and not really see what's taking place. After being insulted, and think about us as African Americans, to be called the N-word, how would you respond? How would you respond? If after all of that, and she came for miles, there were no Amtrak trains, airplanes, or automobiles. She came for miles, walking to get to Jesus. But you know what? I think that, and again, trying to get in the head of this woman, she probably said within herself, "It doesn't matter what he calls me. I know the environment I'm going into. I know the environment is hostile because, again, I'm a Greek, these are Jews. I know the environment is not going to be friendly to me, but he has what I need. And if you want to insult me and call me a dog," again, I'm getting in the head of this woman, If need be, I'll get on all fours and bark. But you have what I need. And sometimes, students, the test of faith is how bad do you want what you say? Are you quick to give up? Are you quick to get insulted? Are you quick to turn around because you don't like the environment? How bad do you want what you say? And this is the woman's response. Truth, Lord. You want to call me a dog? Fine. But even the dogs, and she associated herself with a dog in the presence of the Lord, even the dogs desire the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And you know what Jesus said? Great is your faith. Now, that was an insult to every one of the people around there. All of the people that felt privileged, all of the people that felt like we deserve this because we're Jews. Jesus never said that to any of them. In fact, on occasion, he rebuked his disciples for not having faith. But he says to this woman, who everybody else considers a dog, everybody else doesn't want to be around, and he says, great is your faith. And he says, go and be it done unto you even as you say. And so the lesson here in this particular episode particularly is how this woman's desperation caused her to endure distance, caused her to endure a hostile environment, caused her to endure insults, caused her to be highly insulted by the Lord himself. And yet she said, Lord, even the dogs desire the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Jesus said, great is your faith. Okay. Let's read on a little further. Yet pleading with the Lord for deliverance for her daughter, Jesus told his disciples, have faith in God. St. Mark 11:22. So then faith moves God. The faith of this woman caused her to do incredible things. Dealing with the woman with the issue of blood in our text here. First, her sickness was incapacitating. To have been hemorrhaging for 12 years, meaning that she would have to come back to have a constant state of pain, again, what we talked about earlier. She would have been very weak, subject to dizziness, and even blackout spells. It was probably her desperation that brought her to the point that she felt, regardless of what it takes, even if I die, I've got to touch Jesus. Now, that's desperation. If I die, I'm going to die trying to touch the Lord, because certainly I have the possibility, Sometimes we throw out the alternative, Again, sometimes we're in situations where the Lord doesn't come through for us, the alternative is tragic. If the Lord doesn't come and bless us, it's just like I oftentimes make the comparison of a paratrooper who jumps out of airplanes. Now I was in the military, but I was never a jumper. I never jumped out of an airplane. I was in a whole different military occupational skill altogether. But I've talked to jumpers, guys that jumped out of airplanes, and they would often tell me that they would have to go to classes. As I did in my MOS, I was a communicator. I had to go to classes, tech school, and they were talking about sometime. And the guy would tell me sometime in classes, which we're subject to do, because a lot of times those classes can be long and boring. He said guys would fall asleep in class. He said, but an interesting note, when they told you how to pack your parachute, nobody fell asleep in that class, because they realized if my parachute is packed wrong, or if it gets tangled up, or if it doesn't deploy, it doesn't open, I could die, and die tragically, die falling. So they paid attention. And the lesson is that the only thing saving your life is trust in that silk parachute. It's got to open right. It's not supposed to get tangled. It's not supposed to, fringe up. I guess that's the term. Again, if any of those things happen, you're going to die. And so in that type of class, when they taught them how to pack their parachute, nobody fell asleep, because they realized their life depended upon this. Well, I'm saying that in comparison, that sometimes we're in situations where faith in God is the only thing that's going to keep us from hitting that ground. Like the parachute that tangles up, like the parachute that doesn't open, like the parachute that develops holes. The only thing that saves our life is that parachute. And so we're trusting that what we are told how to fold it and pack it, we're trusting that lesson will save our lives. Once again, this woman, going back to the woman in our text who had this issue of blood, very easily could have died under these circumstances. But I'm gathering, again, trying to get in her head, that if I die, I'm going to die trying to get healed. Why? Because where I am now, I no longer want to be. And again, I don't mean to preach a sermon here. I'm trying to teach a lesson. But sometime in our lives, students, we've got to get to the point where I no longer want to be in this situation. And one way or another, I've got to come out of here. And so I'm going to desperately make steps toward the Lord, trusting that if he doesn't bring me out, I'll die trying. All right, let's go a little bit further. It was probably her desperation that brought her to the point that she felt, regardless of what it takes, even if I die, I've got to get to Jesus. Secondly, here's another setback. It was unlawful for her to be common among the people with such an illness. She would have been considered unclean and not allowed in public. But she did not consider these things because of her affliction, now directed her action. Regardless of what people may have said or thought, none of these things are going to stop her from getting to Jesus. Now, again, this is what desperation will do. It doesn't matter what people think. And oftentimes we can miss a blessing because we're worried about the actions or the reaction of people. What will they think of us? What will they think? Because we've set this high standard of ourselves and we set this high image of ourselves. And we don't want nobody to know what we're dealing with, what we're going through. But this woman threw all that out the window. You know why? Because of the desperation of her affliction. Her affliction brought her to the point where, regardless of what people think, I know I'm unclean. I know I'm not supposed to be out here. I know that I'm, none of that matters. In fact, all these people that may criticize me, none of these people are suffering with what I'm suffering with. It reminds me, and I don't know if we talked about this in lessons past. I'm sure we did. But blind Bartimaeus, when he was by the roadside begging, heard that Jesus was about to pass by. And blind Bartimaeus began to cry out of desperation, "Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me." And the people tried to keep him quiet. But isn't it interesting? Everybody that tried to keep him quiet, none of them were blind. None of them understood what this man's situation was. None of them knew what this man was feeling and experiencing. And yet they tried to tell him to be quiet. It didn't matter. The Bible said the man cried out that much more, "Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me," to the point where he got the Lord's attention. I can imagine the man just screaming and hollering. You know why? Because the man probably thought in his mind, this may be my only opportunity to receive my miracle. My only opportunity. And I don't want to blow it. People don't understand. They're trying to discourage me. They're trying to stop me. They're trying to shush me up. But this may be my only opportunity to receive a miracle from the Lord. All right, let's finish up the discussion here. Third, she had spent all her money. She was broke. But her faith was driven by her desperation. Again, desperation is a motivator. It motivated her to take action, that in turn elevated her faith to another level. And it's interesting. Sometimes desperation brings our faith to another level. Again, going back to blind Bartimaeus. His faith had to go to another level of desperation. And he began to cry. Let's go back to the Syrophoenician woman who had been insulted and ignored. But her faith had taken her to another level. Imagine her friends and family. I wouldn't have taken that. That's a shame that he had called you that. That's a shame. In fact, they wouldn't even have gone. But her faith took her to another level. This is what faith in God would do. All right? She had every right to make excuses and allow her condition to remain her handicap. But she was tired of her situation, and no amount of pain was going to stop her. The desperate despair of this woman was a blessing in disguise. Again, she never would have been healed had she not got desperate. She never would have got out of the house had she been feeling sorry for herself, making excuses. Her desperation set all excuses aside, all criticism aside, all what people think and say. Her desperation elevated her faith, and hence her desperation was a blessing in disguise, because what happened? She received her healing. All right, let's go a little bit further here. Sometimes the Lord allows us to get to a point of desperation because it taps into a source of faith that we otherwise would not come to. This woman recognized that Jesus had the power to heal her. Therefore, it was not necessary for him to touch her. He did not have to come to where she was. She was going to him. Again, desperation is pushing her to where Jesus is. He doesn't have to come to her. Now, again, blind Bartimaeus hollered until Jesus came to where he was. But again, notice the situation between this woman and the Syrophoenician woman. Both of them went to where Jesus was. Our affliction can often cause excuses that handicaps us to an area of our lives. Yet desperate situations can tap our faith that otherwise would remain dormant. In other words, if we're not desperate, our faith will remain dormant. We'd say the Lord is able, but we wouldn't do what was necessary for him to do it for us. Desperate situations leave us little choice but to totally trust God, because all alternative plans are now non-existent. I've got one choice. I've got to get to Jesus. The doctors have taken all my money, and I haven't gotten any better. I'm sitting here in the house in constant pain. I'm not getting any better. I can't stand long. I'm considered unclean. I can't go out in public, but I'm not going to get any better. All those had now become secondary. They had now become non-existent because those choices were gone. And so she has one choice left: get to Jesus. Desperation does not always look for convenience, which is where a lot of us would fail. This woman did not wait for Jesus to come to her or to seek her and touch her. She made up her mind that whatever it takes, I'm going to touch him. Desperation. One in need must ask oneself, how bad do I want it? Often we never receive healing or deliverance because going after them are inconvenient. Again, learn this lesson, students. You that are pursuing education, it's not always going to be convenient. It means sacrifice. I was, as most of you may or may not know, I was the team chaplain of the Chicago Bulls for 37 years. And oftentimes I would share comparison to players with their lifestyle, their lives, with the scripture. And I began to talk to them about discipline. On numerous occasions, I would talk in my little sermons about discipline. And I would compare to them that the reason why you're here in the NBA is because of discipline. You had to sacrifice, to make yourself better. You couldn't be partying all night and hanging out with friends. You had to work on your game. Well, it paid off because you made it to the NBA for however long a short period of time. But my point is this, that in many cases, we never get to where we need to be because we're looking for the easy way or the convenient way. Jesus said to his disciples, when they couldn't cast a spirit out, a demon out of a young boy, he said, this kind goeth forth by nothing but fasting and praying. And again, to get to the level of fasting and praying is not always convenient. We have to make time to pray. We have to sacrifice in fasting if we want to get to that level that give us a spiritual rank. We want to get to that level. So again, often we never receive healing or deliverance because going after them are inconvenient. I don't have time. I don't feel like it. I'm tired. I'm sleepy. I want to do something else. Inconveniences us. In some cases, they may not come as a result of someone just praying or laying hands. Again, I want somebody to lay hands on me and I want to go and shake the world. Having the attitude of, if I have the time or maybe later, will not get one healed or delivered. It is only the desperation that brings faith to a certain level where everything and everybody else is secondary. The main motivation is to totally seek the Lord. All right, let's go to our lesson illustration, which we're about to conclude this lesson here. And I hope, students, that you're getting something out of this. I hope that you're learning something in this, not only to apply to your ministry, but to apply to yourselves as well. Our little lesson illustration, the story is told of a man who was driving home late one night with his family in the car. As they slept, he drove over an ice patch and lost control of the car, causing it to flip over. He was able to crawl out through the window, but his family was trapped inside. Just about that time, the car began to catch fire, and he heard the desperate screams of his family trapped inside. The man did not have time to wait for the fire department, or as time was of the essence. According to the story, the man pushed the car with seemingly supernatural strength and set it upright, rescuing his family from the burning car. What gave the man this strength? It was the desperation of the situation. It is believed that everyone has strengths and abilities that are never tapped unless a desperate situation arises. This man would not ordinarily just push cars over, but the situation summoned a supernatural ability. Sometimes the Lord allows us to get in situations that summon a source of faith that we did not realize that we had. You know, what's interesting about that, students, and I believe that story. I believe it because of the way it was stated. Sometimes hearing the desperate screams of his family and the desperation of the situation, he just took it on and was able to summon strength that he didn't realize he had. And sometimes in our walk with God, we're faced with situations that will tap faith, because the reality is we never really know how much faith we have until faith is put to a test. And when our faith is put to a test of desperation, it will tap faith that we didn't always realize that we had. Now, I hope you learned something from this lesson, not only to apply to your ministry, your teaching, your preaching, your sharing as a missionary, but to your own life as well. That concludes our lesson. We're going to go to our next lesson. So go ahead on into the next lesson. Answer the questions in this lesson, and we'll go prepared to go